At the moment, we're standing inside the new church of Ayot St Lawrence, which was built between the years 1778 to 1779 and designed by Nicholas Revitt for the local squire, a man by the name of Sir Lionel Lyde. In order to build the new church, he had to partially demolish the old church, which sits on the other side of the village, causing so much damage that the church was beyond any form of economic repair, and without the permission of the Church of England, he erected this fantastic Greek revivalist church. In death, he did not want to be placed next to his wife's body, and so what he agreed with the architect when they designed the church was to have two separate tombs at either wing of the church building. So today, at one extreme, we have the remains of Sir Lionel, and at the further extreme on the other side of the church, the remains of his wife. I'm standing outside the former home of George Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright, author and society wit. George Bernard Shaw moved into this house at Shaw's Corner in the village of Ayot St Lawrence in 1906. As many of you would know, he had extremely left-wing political views. At the age of 30, he declared that he had no belief in religion or God. And yet he died here in the year of 1950 at the age of 94. Shortly after Shaw died, his housekeeper, Mrs. Alice Leyden, was clearing out the cupboards in the kitchen when she heard a knock at the door. Without thinking, she automatically said, "Please come in, Mr. Shaw." To her surprise, the door opened and there stood George Bernard Shaw, looking just as though he was still alive. The figure said, "I heard a noise and thought you may have had an accident." Mrs. Leyden was about to reply when she realised there was no longer anyone there. A few days later, George paid another visit to Mrs. Leyden. This time she heard his footsteps on the landing while she was standing at the bottom of the stairs, and she heard him call, "Are you there, Mrs. Leyden?" After that, the footsteps died away. I'm standing in one of the leafy lanes that surrounds Ayot St Lawrence, and in fact, my next story concerns a very famous person, a man by the name of Thomas Edward Lawrence, or T.E. Lawrence, more famously known as Lawrence of Arabia. He was a friend of George Bernard Shaw and his wife Constance, and he used to ride frequently to their house here, or alternatively, they used to visit him at his home in Dorset. His machine was a Brough Superior SS 100 motorcycle, which he nicknamed George VII. In 1935, he died riding that motorcycle in Dorset, trying to avoid contact with two boys riding across the front of him on cycles. And it's said that since that date, his motorcycle has been heard around these roads leading around the village, and particularly so outside Shaw's Corner. We're standing outside the Brocket Arms in the village of Ayot St Lawrence, and this also has an interesting paranormal story to tell. This is the part of the Brocket Arms which is reputedly haunted by a monk or a priest who, after the reformation of the Catholic Church in England, was found guilty of some alleged crime and was hung from one of the beams here. This building was originally constructed in 1378 and provided quarters, monastic quarters as it were, for priests using the nearby Norman church, which sadly today lies in ruins. Quite apart from the monk who haunts the pub, allegedly people have heard footsteps and they've heard the sound of children. And apparently, more recently, activity appears to be on the increase in the rented accommodation area of the building, which is upstairs. There is certainly an atmosphere in this building, and just wandering around you can feel, shall we say, a sense of history that's attached to this place. And I have no doubt in my mind that under the right conditions on a quiet night, this could provide quite a lot of activity for those who are seriously interested in the paranormal. And for our next visit, we're going across the road to the remains of the original Norman church. I'm actually inside the remains of the old church at Ayot St Lawrence, and there is a kind of rustic beauty about this particular churchyard. You have the cemetery laid out with tombs and graves, and it has a pervasive atmosphere of spirituality. I can feel this now. The church was built around the 13th century, and this was the one that was destroyed in order to build the new church which we visited earlier today. I'm going for a wander around this beautiful remains and to give you some kind of feeling and flavour of this particular location. This weekend we're at St Breville's Castle, which is in the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire and not too far from the border with Wales. And here St Breville's Castle has that historical significance in relationship to where it's actually built, because originally it was created as a defensive position to keep the Welsh marauders from attacking the English towns and villages from across the border. And of course, one can imagine that the English were probably replying in kind by attacking Welsh villages and towns across the border, and the Welsh, of course, had to defend their fortifications. However, the castle became a royal hunting lodge during the time of King John, and certainly over the centuries it's passed hands through many royal personages, and at one point it was used to manufacture quarrels. Now, I'm sure many of you who are not conversant with what the actual significance of the word quarrels is has nothing to do with people arguing. In fact, quarrels were crossbow bolts, and they were particularly good and successful at producing them here, and especially so, of course, for their constant wars and battles with the Welsh. There is a potted history of the castle where it was used as a debtor's prison, and I believe between 1850 and 1910 it was a private school, and after 1910 the castle was completely renovated. Now, when one uses the term renovation, one tends to think of a complete original building that has had significant repairs done to it. Quite different here, unfortunately. The castle over the centuries had fallen into a terrible state of dereliction, and so a very wealthy person with the will and the might to do this created or recreated a medieval fantasy castle, and that is what St Breville's is today. Because if anyone wanders around the building with an interest in architecture, they'll discover there's staircases that disappear into walls, windows to nowhere, and all kinds of odd bits of stonework which have been incorporated rather incongruously into different parts of the structure which bear no relationship to what they were originally used for. However, despite the amount of renovations which have taken place here, it is today a magnificent example, visually, of a 12th century castle. And from 1948 onwards, it was taken over by the Youth Hostel Association, with English Heritage carrying the ownership responsibilities for the building. And today, hundreds, and over a course of a year, thousands of people have passed through here, staying overnight, enjoying the facilities which are offered here, and being able to travel across the countryside in the beautiful Forest of Dean, and of course nearby Wye Valley. I'm certainly very grateful to Adam and Paula Heath of Forest Paranormal Investigations, who have hosted this wonderful event over the weekend, and of course indebted to their local historian on the history of the building and of course on the paranormal activity, Mr. Ross Andrews. I'm with Mr. Ross Andrews, who is a local historian with many locally and, I believe, nationally published works on the paranormal and the history of Gloucestershire.
I've had quite a few books. What I would do is write a book particularly about one region and so on, so we'd look into the history of any particular ghost in that area. But this building we're in now is probably the most written about building I've ever...
And I think this is your favourite,
Oh, absolutely. This is the most haunted building you could ever possibly wish to be in.
So how could you convince me, and indeed anyone looking in today, that this is the most haunted building?
The only way I can convince you is to come and stay here for the night. It is a youth hostel, so you can actually book to stay in the prisons or in the oubliette room or the hanging room, any of these places where people have been killed. You can actually come and stay here without a problem. We're currently stood in King John's Lounge. It obviously wasn't called King John's Lounge when he was around. This was known as a solar room because you've got windows on every side letting the sun into the room. This is one of the oldest parts of the building. Now, if you've been on the internet, you may well have read about one of the stories here, which is called The Crying Baby.
Yes, I've certainly read about that. But tell us more about it. I'm sure people would be intrigued to know.
Well, that's situated in this room. Now, the fireplace we've got here, some of this fireplace actually isn't original to this building. It's come from another building, which is why the pillars don't match and so on. But the Crying Baby used to be heard here. Back in the 70s, when they renovated this ceiling, above the fireplace they found a mummified body of a baby. And a lot of the crying has kind of calmed down a bit since they found that, but it still does happen.
Why would they do that?
Well, there is one theory where they used to quite often it happened with cats. They used to put the body of something into a building, and that spirit would protect the building. Now, whether that's true of this one, we don't know. Whether it was just somebody putting a body there to hide it, we don't know.
Well, possibly. It's also a royal residence, and of course, in many humble dwellings, I live in East Anglia, and of course, as you say quite rightly, people used to place live cats,
Yep.
even with their kittens, alive, inside, walled up. And the idea was that if an evil spirit entered the house, it would go and be absorbed into the bodies
Yep.
of
Yep.
these two animals. And of course, in a royal residence, you're not going to have just some small cat or kittens. You're going to have something more significant. So in a way, it's a form of human sacrifice.
Yeah, it could well be. It could well be. I mean, a lot of these things, obviously, the history books don't write it down, say these things, but local.
But there's some
tradition goes
dark
back.
question marks, definitely.
Now, well, speaking about dark question marks about this place,
Yeah.
one of the possible stories about this place, and we're not entirely sure, but all the way along here you'll see these notches. This building was used as a prison, as a courtroom for the whole of the forest, and those are supposed to represent the amount of people that were killed just by one judge and had
Wow.
them executed. Whether that's true, we're not entirely sure because the records obviously don't.
Would this
weren't
be somebody
preserved.
like Judge Jeffreys, perhaps? Or?
Well, the problem with Judge Jeffreys is wherever you go to a haunted place, they'll say Judge Jeffreys was here and he killed 500 people. When in reality, we can't say that. There's no record of him.
But there was certainly a judge. And how many people do you think on there? How many notches are there, roughly?
Well, just on that one, we're looking at about 25 there. But it also sort of carries on through that, and you're thinking, well, is that 25 there and 25 there, and 50 in total, or so? We're not sure. We don't sort of go around saying that definitely happened, but it is a well-known story about.
But what a terrible, if that is true, what a terrible legacy. And whoever carved this obviously got either they felt bad about the people that died here, or they got satisfaction
Well, yeah, they were.
at knowing that these people have been dispensed.
Yes, there's certainly enough stories about torturers and prison guards and so on that were sadistic and would absolutely love what they're doing.
And that's an interesting factor about this building, isn't it?
Well,
It was a prison, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we'll go to the prison in a moment where you'll see some more carvings. They're actually, it's a listed monument, and there is a curse carved into one of the walls that was left by one of the prisoners, and we've also got some drawings that have been carved into the walls by some of the prisoners as well.
So far, this has been a wonderful excursion around, okay, what really is, to a certain extent, a facsimile of the original castle, because it's been extensively reconstructed, but there is still so much history here and so much wonderment. So let's
Well,
carry
that's
on.
one of the oldest parts of the building, which is where the prison is. So, this is a very old part of the castle. This is the prison, one of the original prison cells.
Wow.
Which is now a youth hostel and is now a bedroom. So
Well, even just walking through, I can see there's loads of graffiti. So what's going on here?
Graffiti, we've got some fantastic pieces. If you see behind us here, I don't know if you can pick this up on the camera, but these are actual windmills. And the story is that these were carved by Dutch prisoners that were held in the prison here. Now, one of the stories associated with this place is a new member of staff had come here, and they do a training exercise where all the staff in one building, they all go to one of the youth hostels and all train there. So they locked up this room, and there used to be big wardrobes in front of these. So he'd never seen these carvings at all. They'd gone off for the week, locked the whole castle up, nobody was in the castle at all. Came back a week later, came in and all the furniture had moved, and then he noticed these. So that's how he knew the furniture had definitely moved, because he'd never seen these things before.
So it had all been exposed for him.
So to him it was definite proof that it had moved. He didn't come in thinking, hang on, was that there before? He said it had to have moved because he'd never seen these before.
But the carvings are very simple, but very beautiful.
Well, we say simple. I mean, some of the carvings we've got in these little niches over here. There's a fantastic curse written on one of the walls over there by one of the prisoners. This is actually listed graffiti. The castle nearly got closed to the public. I think it was in 2006, and it's written somewhere on the wall where one of the school parties turned up and decided to add a bit of graffiti to the wall.
Dear.
And it nearly actually closed the whole building because of this, because it's technically against the law to add graffiti to this.
Well, it's a scheduled building, isn't it?
Yes. Now, this is one of the parts of the building that was used the longest, because the building has collapsed and been rebuilt several times, and at one point this was the only cell that could still be used, because the ceilings had collapsed in the other tower, the rooms over there, the roof had collapsed and so on. It was just this floor and the floor below.
Terrible, isn't it? But it's also just standing here and looking at this graffiti, and there's someone who's written on there, "Help," and these poor people in desperation, they knew that there was every possibility that this would be their last on this earth, and they were determined to leave a record of themselves.
One reason you would know, looking out of the window that we have here, directly above us is a room called the hanging room, where they would literally chuck people off the side of the castle, hanging onto the beams and die that way. But the bodies would be hanging in front of these windows. So if you're in the prison, you may well have seen a body hanging outside your window.
And this was a warning to the ill-educated peasantry that if you step out of line,
this is what's going to happen.
This is going to happen to you. Yeah.
But in the and we'll go up there eventually into the hanging room. The hanging room still has directly above it the 5 beams that go out the front of the castle, where they used to hang people from actually just dangling down in front of the windows.
It's such a terrible history, and yet it's such a beautiful location.
Well, you say it's a terrible history. It's also been a private house. It's been a private school.
Yeah.
It's been used for lots of different things, but it just amazes me that you're sending your children to a school where are you sleeping? Oh, I'm in the place where they murdered people. I'm in the place where they imprisoned people. I'm in the place where they hanged people. It's just a fantastic history for the whole building. And you look out the windows and you're facing a graveyard, which makes it even better.
Yeah, with a church, very conveniently next door. A haunted church, a beautiful church. But I'm seriously impressed with some of the graffiti on here, because it is a record of the castle. It is.
It's not just the graffiti. They're also. I don't know if the camera can pick this up. If you follow me over here, we've had some ghost hunters in here for the evening, and it's getting themselves comfortable. But if we move this, you'll see where the original chains and things were, where you would be chained to these posts here, and there would be little metal loops and so on like that, so your chains would be attached to them.
Wow.
So it's still a reminder of that history there as well.
And being chained here, they would look out of the windows again, and people would walk past, presumably their families. And
yeah, I mean, there's one tradition that goes on here where they would hand out bread and cheese to the peasant folk and so on like that. But you'd be sat here watching it happen, starving, watching people being fed by the good lord of the castle and the church that used to hand out all the food.
With the power of God.
Yeah, exactly. We're not sure how many people have been killed here, but we do know there's been a fair few different murders.
And well, there's a hook on here, so presumably this prisoner could be not only shackled in here, but they could actually close him off.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to find some of the dates that we've got on here just to show you. But there's one there, 1681. There's, I think that's 1580 something there. And in the next alcove along, if we can head in the other direction, you've got an entire curse that's been carved into the wall just here, as we can see, from Robin Belcher. And that's the most famous piece of graffiti we've got in the whole building.
Where's the story, the backstory to this?
Not entirely sure, because it's not necessarily been kept as records, but that one goes back to 1674. There we go.
So after the Civil War?
Well, a lot of the prisoners here were to do with debtors' prisons and so on like that here, but it was a place of execution, so there were some serious prisoners here.
And again, the Belcher curse still exists to this day. Has anyone suffered in the Belcher family, do you know?
Well, not that I'm aware of, but this is one of the most active rooms for physical phenomena.
Wow.
We had a ghost hunter group once, and they were sat in that window, and they were getting a bit bored. As most ghost hunters will know, 90% of the time it's sat in a dark room doing nothing. And they were going, come on, do something. At which point, one of the pillows off of one of the beds over there lifted up and just came flying towards them and hit them whilst they were sat over there. Some of the best footage I've seen is in here with lights. We get a lot of lights flying around the castle. And just in the middle of the room they appeared and started zigzagging all over the room. And it's not just appeared on camera, there were actually people going, oh my god, look at this, and they even ducked as these lights went over the top of their heads.
So it can be very intense here on some occasions.
Well, we're heading into the East Tower,
Right, okay.
Now, actually, as we walk through, I'll just point out this. Each one of these doors had its own portcullis. So as you can see that slot up there, that's where the portcullis would come down.
Wow. Oh, and you can see the groove where it slid up and down.
Yeah. Now, let's go through this one. This leads through to one of my favourite rooms. Here we go.
Ah, I'm looking forward to this.
Follow me as we head to the oubliette.
The oubliette.
These are now all bedrooms for the youth hostel, and part of the original castle, this was solid wall. This has been hacked out here. This is not the original staircase.
Okay.
This one's a few hundred years old, but the original one's actually at the back of the building, which has fallen down. Now this one here is the oubliette. It sounds like a scary room, when in reality it's lovely and cosy. You can come on in.
Sounds very French.
A lovely cosy room. It is French.
Yeah.
It comes from the word oublier, to forget. Now the reason you would be forgotten about is down here. Let me just open this up. A lot of people stay here and they don't know this exists because we normally cover this with a carpet. But here we go. This is the oubliette. Let me just flick some lights on down here.
And it's well padlocked. Oh my God, that's very deep.
Now, whatever you do, don't drop anything down there, because if it goes down there, it stays down there, like our little friend down there.
This is incredible, Ross.
Well, yeah, this is thought to be an original oubliette. Now, for those of you who don't know what an oubliette is, you were literally thrown down there and forgotten about. If you were lucky, you landed on your head and you died.
And that's quite a drop. How deep is that?
Well, that actually is not as deep as it used to be.
No, I can imagine it was a lot deeper.
At one point, this tower's roof collapsed, and a lot of the chunks of rubble and all that just collapsed through, and they're down there now, as you can see.
You can see debris there, yeah.
So it could have been another 10 foot deeper for all we know. We don't know if it was used as an oubliette, but the local history says it was, so we're not going to argue with that because it's quite spooky.
Well, you know, I mean, looking at this, it's circular, and I've seen many oubliettes, and they tend to be narrow shafts.
Yes.
And they just chuck them down, and many had spikes or some kind of terrible death waiting for them. But the circumference of this suggests to me that this would have been possibly the source of water in the castle.
Well, I can tell you it wasn't the source of water because that was further back, but what it may have been was a storeroom at some point, and has been used as but then actually we'll use it as a storeroom.
It doesn't come across as, I mean, it's such a big space just to throw one person down. I know they would build them up. I know they would build bodies up, but just to do that.
They would also, because some of the castles have huge ones, and it was basically a holding cell. Now what would happen is if you weren't dead when you hit the floor, you might be dead by that evening and be food for the other people that were already down there. And some places, some castles used to use it as a form of entertainment.
Oh, I can all sit round and have a laugh.
Yeah, and have a laugh at the poor unfortunate people that are down there. Now, some of the stories we've had of this, certainly with night vision cameras and so on, there's a lot of lights and things that come out of this. And it's thought to be possibly one of the sources for the scary bed, which is this bed here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a lot of stories of people sleeping in this bed and something grabbing the bottom of the duvet and just pulling it.
Right, okay.
People have woken up fighting with whatever it is to try and keep the duvet on, and they're the only person in the room.
Has anyone been clawed or...
I've not heard of any actual sort of like physical attacks on that, but there are people who have been grabbed in this room by things that aren't here. That tends to happen on the other side. This one tends to be just the sheets being pulled off. Now, there's a guy here last year. He moved the bed and wedged it against the wall.
Right,
and when they asked him why he moved the bed, he said it was the only way he could get the sheets to stay on was to wedge it against the wall to stop.
Otherwise they'd be pulled off. Yeah.
Now,
and I've experienced that type of activity, and you're lying in bed, and all of a sudden the entire duvet goes flying across the room, and you know it's somebody in spirit and they're having a little joke, aren't they?
Well, this one, this is the room where the most people who have left have been staying.
This is the place. If you want to get rid of anybody from St Breville's Castle, you put them in here.
Now, there's not a huge amount of activity in here compared to some of the other parts of the building, but the stuff that does happen in here is quite
It's
big.
quite profound, yeah.
One woman was found in the King John's Lounge early in the morning crying, and she'd been staying in here, and she wouldn't even come back. She was just wearing pyjamas then, and she wouldn't come back and pack her bags. The staff had to pack her bags for her. And then she left. She was not coming back into this.
Was she a paranormal investigator?
No, this is just people staying.
A normal guest.
Yeah. Most of the stories actually come from
Travellers.
Travellers that have been here, school parties. This is the tower where a lot of teachers won't stay. They're perfectly willing to let the kids stay in this tower, but teachers who've stayed here with their schools over the years, they tend to sleep on the other side.
Which might be understandable in the circumstances.
Well, the first time a lot of the teachers stay here, they get very annoyed because they keep coming over because they can hear children running around. And then they come into the part of the building and all the children are asleep.
Because the children here, they obviously feel a connection with the children.
Well, as I say, it was a boarding school at one point. So.
And the children here are left to sleep because the other children enjoy them being here. Well, and of course they don't like adults, do they?
Well, a few months ago there was a story here where there was a family staying in this room, and there was a family staying in the room on the top.
Right.
And they came to blows basically in the morning. The dad from the one family with the other one, and they were saying, well, your kids were running around all night up and down the stairs and making noises and keeping my kids awake. And the other dad from the other family said, no, hang on, your kids were running up and down the stairs and keeping my family awake all night. And then the manager or whoever it was that was working in the castle at the time brought out one of my books and pointed out and said, no, look, this is what happens in this castle. You've experienced a paranormal instance.
How many books have you written on the castle?
Well, I've only written one book specifically about this castle, but I've had to include, because so many stories have happened since I've written that book, in 2 other books that I've written, I've had to include more and more stories.
So it's an expanding digest of the history here, of the paranormal activity.
I cannot emphasise enough how haunted this building is. Like yourself, you've been to buildings all over the country, and generally speaking, you walk in there and you just go, it's very interesting, it's fantastic, the film stuff, might get the odd bit or something like that, but most ghost hunting is pretty quiet.
Yes, of course.
Whereas here, every week you'll get a report of something. But there is a lot of noise activity in this tower, certainly compared to the other towers as well, of people walking about, furniture moving and so on.
It's one hell of a strange building. Of course, the problem with big buildings, if you've got a lot of people staying here as guests, the real issue here, of course, is are they making that noise or is it spirit?
Now, this is why the ghost hunts are good, because generally speaking, if the ghost hunting group that are here are any good, they know where everybody is.
Right, yeah.
Whereas most of the stuff here, you could come and stay here, experience paranormal activity and not know you've experienced paranormal activity. There's a ghost of a dog that's on the other side of the castle, and a lot of people have seen the dog. Now, they just assume it's a dog. There's people get out of the way for this dog to go past, and it's not until you actually point out to them there are no dogs in the castle, we don't allow dogs in the castle, so they go, but I've just seen one, and you go, no, it's not a real dog. and it's not until somebody points it out to them that they've experienced something paranormal.
And then, of course, when they know it's paranormal, it's like the cold, a cold sensation down their spine at the sudden realisation that what they thought was real wasn't.
Yeah, very much so.
Where are we off to next for the next?
Well, I can take you to various different places, but I think we'll stick to this tower.
Okay.
And it's a bit of a trek up some dangerous stairs right up onto the top floor.
I've got to guess, are we going to the Chaplain?
We certainly are, yes. Follow me up the dangerous stairs.
Okay, thank you. Is this an original staircase?
No, this is not the original staircase, because you'll notice it actually goes up the wrong way, because it'd be very difficult to defend with a sword. They normally go the other way.
That's right, unless you're left-handed.
But if you can see, this was actually hacked out of the wall, because the original staircase is part of the building that collapsed.
Right,
so they had to build this new one. Now it is, you can tell by the flagstone areas here where they dip in the middle, it is quite old, we're talking hundreds of years, but it's not the original. Now it gets even more awkward as we come up here, and it's almost like walking up a ladder. So
right, okay, well, I will tread gingerly. Wow.
Right, now we're on the top floor of the East Tower. Exhausting.
It's quite a hike, isn't it? It is very much a hike.
But you'll notice by the, if you look around at the walls, you'll see that all the brickwork is so different in places, and this is one of the bits that did collapse at one point. at various points.
I mean, obviously here, quite a bit of infill here, isn't there?
Yes.
And some of it's come out again.
Well, this wall wouldn't have existed. This would have carried you right through to the hanging room on the other side and the prisons and so on. Yeah, we've had two staff, this is going back about 3 or 4 years, and they were sat in the window alcove over there, and they said they heard somebody come into the room, and that, like, they were stood here, and they were the only people in the castle. We knew that everybody was accounted for. There was nobody here. I went to see the radio show, and I was in the floor below, and we had a ghost hunter sat on a chair just here. And I was talking away as you do for radio, non-stop, so it's constantly going, well, as you can hear, there's somebody walking about upstairs, but that's Ruth upstairs with her camera, and got to the end of this, and I came upstairs and said, Ruth, well, did you get anything? Well, I didn't. All I heard was you walking around. And she said, do you mean over there? I went, yeah. She said, I've been sat still for the whole thing. She said, I heard it, and I've got it on tape as well. So.
Well, can I add my own experience here? We were actually sleeping, both Sean and myself were sleeping in this room last night, and you were down in the constables.
Yeah, the one below, yep.
And we could hear you dragging beds around, banging chairs, closing doors, and this went on for quite some time. Now, obviously, because you're hearing it, your initial response is, what on earth is he doing down there?
Yes.
And conversely, they could hear it down below you, but in your room, there was nothing.
Yeah, no, I was asleep.
Yeah, it was just incredibly amazing. Yeah. And Sean was on camera, I'll tell his story. He thought that this morning, I got out of bed and slammed the door as I went out to the toilet, and then he heard me going down the steps 3 times, and it disappeared, didn't it?
It's the other way around.
Oh, right.
It's coming into the room.
Coming into the room.
The door squeaked, slammed. I heard 3
Right, okay.
steps,
And then it stopped.
and it stopped, and I thought you actually got into bed. But
Well, I mean, I actually went to the loo twice last night, and mindful of the fact that these doors do slam because they shut automatically. I very carefully closed the door before going down. So it was obviously their way of just reminding us that they're still very much in control.
Well, we've had some great stuff in here with the ports, actually. There was a group in here, they were rolling a coin across the floor to each other for some reason, I don't know why, and then they stopped doing that, and suddenly they heard a coin roll across the floor. And it was dark in here, they were using night vision cameras, and they said, oh, go on, who did that one then? And they were all going, wasn't me, and they realised the coin had rolled from a place where nobody was.
Wow.
And rolled towards them, and it was an old Victorian penny, and it rolled towards this door over here. Now there's also the room where the beds have moved. We've had 3 people sat on a bed, and the bed actually just shook and lifted and so on like that. And that was one of my favourite stories here. Used to get a lot, and we don't anymore.
Well,
was about scratching noises.
Oh,
it's
right.
purely because of the bats that live in the attic.
Oh, the bats are up there.
Yes.
Oh, and you've got a hatchway, it's well padlocked. Well, I mean, again, just for the camera, and Sean's on the camera, he was here last night leaning up against this bed, and he felt it move like this, wasn't it? Twice.
Doing the box,
And of course, he spoke to Ross afterwards, and it was obviously revealed that this is a phenomena which occurs in this room.
But the one thing about that is we don't tell the people the stories until
that's
something has
right.
happened to them. So we haven't told him that the bed had moved, and then he experienced it. He experienced the bed before we told him that had happened.
Is there any known reason why they do this?
No, and I've a friend of mine is an architect and surveyor and so on, and he's come into the building and gone through room by room, checking out what could be making noises, why doors would move and so on, and there's no explanation for that. There's nothing wrong with the floor or anything like that in here that could possibly cause it. So,
it's literally built on rock,
yes,
isn't it? You know, there's no way it's going to move. Well, it's been very interesting. This is one hell of an amazing place.
Oh, honestly, it's the most haunted place you've ever Right, well now we're in the old kitchen. Now this is called the old kitchen for one major reason.
Yep.
It was the old kitchen.
Well, that's normally a good reason.
And there's a way of knowing that. And behind you here, you'll see a dog spit. And this is an original. There's very few of these left in the country. And what would happen is they would put a dog inside this wheel. The dog would run around, and this was linked by a chain to the meat that was, this obviously not original.
So it's a rotisserie.
Yeah, and it went just running around and it would turn the meat over the fire.
That's amazing. That
But
poor
it's one of the
animal,
few-
though.
Yeah, it's one of the few that still remain in situ. Now, this isn't the dog that's seen wandering around the castle.
Okay.
The dog that's seen generally wandering around is kind of like an Irish Wolfhound, massive thing. That's why people get out of its way when they're walking around the castle. So.
I can imagine you see something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I like to point out it's not a real dog. It is but what has happened when people have seen it, we've asked them to send us photographs. Go on the internet, find a photograph of the dog breed that you think it is, and send it to us. And 9 times out of 10, they'll send us the same breed of dog, and it's this kind of like Irish Wolfhound.
So again, that's independent verification of a paranormal event. But I mean, this room is crazy. I know we were talking about the history of this place and how it's been remodelled, but how on earth have we got a staircase that just goes into the wall over here?
Well, this is the actual original staircase. Our lovely cameraman, hello there. You're stood on I would say a new staircase, but it's still hundreds of years old.
Early 20th century.
It's going back a fair bit, back when it was a private house and so on. But the original staircase is here, and that would go all the way to the top of the tower.
And it's dressed stone, so this suggests this is a quality build.
Oh, absolutely. And what I used to find funny, we've had quite a few fake mediums into the building. And they would very often come down this staircase here, the wooden staircase, and they'd be saying like, oh, someone fell down this staircase, and we say, well, what year? And they're going about, 1400 and something, and you're going, no, because it's that staircase, not this one. Now, I don't want to worry our camera friend up here, but where he is stood, it is actually haunted, and there has been a hand holding onto the balcony that's just seen walking down as though it belonged to somebody that's coming down that staircase. This is quite famous now for a poltergeist activity. We've not experienced poltergeist activity for a few years, but for a very long time, he used to get called Tom.
Tom.
There would be people sat in here, and stones would appear and just fall straight down. There was no ballistic curve to it. It would literally just come straight down. Literally
through the ceiling.
As though they'd come from the ceiling. But the ceiling had been rebuilt. This ceiling was fixed about 6 years ago, and if you see up here, it's totally sealed. There's nowhere for a stone of anything to have fallen from the floor above and come through. And one night we had something like 40 or 50 people experience this.
Wow.
Now, when we do ghost hunts here, we say if something happens, don't tell anyone. Write it down, say where it happened, what time it happened, and so on. And then at about 2 o'clock at night, we sort of get everyone in one room and just say, well, what happened to you? What happened to you? And this one group said, well, we had 4 or 5 stones thrown at us, at which point every group put their hand up and just went, we had that, we had that, we had that.
Well, I can only honestly say, thank God it hasn't happened to me. It's not a very pleasant experience.
Oh, well, some of them are little tiny ones. The biggest one was about that big, but some of them are very
Any
tiny.
Manifestations in here? Any full, partial, apart from the hand?
Yes, there is a dog that's been seen. The big dog is seen in here. There's also children have been seen in here. There was one school group that stayed here. And this is going back about 10 managers ago, so we're looking at about 7 or 8 years ago. And you can see there's a little window there.
Yes, yeah.
She walked past the window as the school were getting onto their coach and going, looked in here and saw a small child, about the age of the kids that were here. So instead of running in to get the child, she thought, right, I'll run out and stop the coach going. And she just said, whoa, 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 you've left one. And they did a head count. Everyone was on the coach. Came back in here.
Child had gone.
Yeah, nobody here.
Well, that is really fascinating. Unfortunately, our time here with you today is coming to an end. I know you've got to deliver a speech very shortly, but thank you very much for the fascinating insight into this wonderful building. And I'm sure that when people look at this video, they will see segments of things that they've experienced here themselves, and they may not have reported it. So if anybody has got any activity which they've captured here, and stuff they may not have shared or spoken to, and of course having seen the video, it's reminded them of those incidents, where can they send it?
Well, send it directly to me. You can go to ghostnight@hotmail.co.uk, send me the story, send any photos and so on like that.
And the address is here?
Yeah, I will in the books that we write, we try and catalogue everything, basically. So if you've got a story, it may not have been written down, because we only tend to write them down if they've happened 2 or 3 times. So you may be the 2nd or 3rd person this has happened to. We desperately want to hear from you.
And there might be something new and original that's not been discovered.
Yeah.
Well, that's brilliant. Thanks very much. You're a gentleman, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And on with the speeches.